all for joining us in person and online for this proposal training. So just a few items. So yes, we have our guest speaker here from Rio, which is the Research and Innovation Office, Jim. I'll introduce him here in a second. He's going to be taking us through this training today. This is put on by myself. My name is Carrie Bowen. I'm the CSERD's Admin and Science Manager here at the NOAA building, and Becca, who's the Director of Access and Cultural Innovation. Let's go on to the next slide. I do want everyone to be aware that we will be recording this session today, just the session and the slides, nothing else. So we'll be sending that out along with a copy of the slide deck for your use. So today's agenda, we're going to be spending obviously the bulk of our time today working on the presentation, the proposal writing best practices for clear and persuasive proposals. So we hope you get something out of this. This is something that was kind of brought out of a need that we felt was required here at the building, given transitions and just an opportunity for people to grow and professionally develop themselves and just kind of learn something new potentially, or relearn or just brush up on some skills. So we're really glad that you're here today. So after the presentation, we'll have some time with Jim for questions and answers. And then we're going to do a little bit of a listening session. Obviously, this section of the course, the workshop, will not be recorded, but we'll be doing a listening session of community needs. Just kind of, we want to hear what you need. We want to hear where there potentially are gaps so we can develop more trainings in the future. And then we'll have a short survey as we do. And as Becca always says, these surveys do go into the services we provide, the workshops, the training, the assistance we provide. We do look at them. We consider them. So please take time. We do have paper copies here for you because we know the Wi-Fi in this room is very spotty. So we do have that for you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today. Next slide, please, Becca, which is Jim. Jim, I do not want to butcher your last name, so could you properly pronounce it for me?
I need to try it. I need to try it at least once, and then I'll correct it.
Mazzuccolo.
Mazzuccolo.
Ah, so close. It's
or Mazzuccolo.
Mazzuccolo, very lovely. So yeah, Jim is a proposal writer, a lot of experience in this in this field in many different ways. He's a writer, editor, research development strategist from the CU Boulder Research and Innovation Office, Rio. He has 13 years of experience, as I mentioned, in many different fields and avenues: NIH, Department of Energy, NSF, Department of Defense. So very experienced in this area, has a lot of information to share. So please utilize him while he's here with us today. So without further ado, Jim. Oh, you got one.
I like the green band. That's why. And I think the most important thing to know is that since they both said that they're responsible for bringing me here today, if I'm not good, it's their fault. Ultimately, the buck stops at them. No. Jim Mazzuccolo, it says proposal writer. You never want me writing anything because you won't get funded, right? I don't know the science, but I'm an editor and a reviewer, and I sometimes heavily reconstruct what people have written, right? But I never add anything, okay? So just make that clear. The university likes to put writer at the end, even though, I've philosophy, political science, and history background. You don't want me doing anything NOAA related, right? Funny slide, right? If we're thinking about doing proposals and writing proposals, lots of people write proposals, particularly now. Tons of people are writing proposals in the hope that anything thrown up against the wall will stick, right? Which is usually never a good way or attitude towards writing proposals. That said, regardless of whether you're writing 10 or 3, you're also up against people who are writing potentially the same amount, or at least others who are writing. What needs to be done, obviously, or at least this was the way it was in the past, science was super important, right? But we all know there are tons of good scientists, right? What distinguishes, I'd say for the most part, like a fundable proposal versus this is a good proposal, is how clearly you're writing and how easily accessible the writing is to the reviewer. And you can go to the next slide. I didn't give you the high sign. Maybe I'll do that. Um, and you can run through it all until you get, yeah. So effective proposals, obviously, right? Your ability as an investigator to conduct the project, scholarly or scientific, designated time frame and budget. Time frame and budgets, not my problem. Thank the dark gods, all right? Because like I can budget my own stuff. I can't budget like $1 million, right, awards. It's the intersection of your expertise and the potential funder's needs. Important point number one. You may think, well, duh, but sometimes it's easy, particularly if it's desperate times, to lose sight that you have to be giving the funder something they want, right? Like I say, it's an intersection of what you can do and what they want. You're ultimately giving them something that they need, right, for any number of reasons. Um, Third, it's rational persuasion, right? Sometimes these kind of presentations will give the impression that there's some kind of a magic bullet, or somebody will come up here and say, yes, the people I've assisted, have gotten 500 bajillion dollars, which kind of like implicitly makes you think, like, well, then that person immediately can get me money. There's no magic bullet. I'm not a snake oil salesman, like selling you like, here's proposal fund, right? Just sprinkle it on your proposal and you'll get your funding. It's a rationally persuasive argument, right? And since you are very limited in your page count to persuade the reviewer or reader, it's got to be firing on all cylinders, if you know what I mean by that, right? It's got to be hitting every point as clearly as possible. Essentially, and I'll hammer this home a number of times, what you want to do is basically be a tour guide, or since we're in Boulder, like a hiking guide, right? For the reader or reviewer. You know the lay of the land ahead of time. Your reader doesn't. You will put signposts, right? Just like on a trail throughout the proposal, so they know where they're going, the reader. And because you are the one ultimately in control of your writing, okay, you are going to lead these readers, reviewers by the hand, or if need be, like by the nose, right? Through every point, okay? Just like a tour guide. And also, you can't escape this. Usually you have to highlight some sort of innovative approach, methodology, or technology, right? These are the basics, the very basics. It gets a little more complicated, right? So I kind of already, by way of like joking, have a philosophy background, right? Humanities background, history, political science, right? It's all about understanding arguments and making arguments. You're doing the same thing when you're writing a proposal. However, there's a chance that you haven't been trained to write arguments or to think of your proposal writing as an argument. I mean, the camera won't pan on you, but like show of hands, how many of you would consider proposal writing as a form of writing an argument? Okay. How many of you do you think have been taught that? Oh, yeah, right. Like it's maybe sort of. Most likely, it's never something that's formal, or at least hasn't been formal in the past, meaning it's given out by the department or something like that. Usually, you've had to rely on a really good mentor to potentially be like, all right, this is kind of how you do it. All right. So, a rhetorical argument. I will not spend a lot of time talking about this because, I don't want to put you to sleep right now. But Aristotle, ancient dead Western white guy, right? He gave us the three cornerstones of what is a rhetorical argument. Rhetoric gets a bad name, right? Rhetoric is usually thought about as having no aim towards the truth. Aristotle, the way we're understanding him here, it does have an aim towards the truth. There are three cornerstones, okay? The speaker, the message, and the audience. Keep those three in mind because you're the speaker, the message is what you're writing, the audience is the reader reviewer. I'm going to have way too much fun doing that. So proposal writing is very different from academic writing. Okay. You need to engage your reader writer immediately. We'll talk about a method to do that. So you're not right. This isn't a journal article. You probably already know this stuff, but I need to say it, right? Just to make sure. There you go. Your mindset as a proposal writer. I take a very stoic approach. Okay. Stoics, another bunch of dead Western Greek guys. You obviously very, very intimately now are experiencing things that are outside of your control. What is in your control is the writing. What's not in your control is congressional budgets, the mindset of the reader or reviewer, right? What is in your control is your mindset as a proposal writer. If you've never written a proposal before, or if you have and you think it's maybe a little shaky or whatever, or you don't feel confident, keep in mind proposal writing is a skill. It's a skill like any other. You can develop it. There isn't necessarily a formula, right? It's not something, with like mathematical certainty. If you plug things in here, you get a good proposal. However, the more you write, the more you keep in mind let's say the basics, the better you're going to get. One of the keys here is to be confident. If you've never written a proposal before, your attitude or mindset before writing is that I know what I'm doing, right? I know what I'm talking about. After almost, I'd say like 15, 16 years in the area of like academic research, if you are familiar with what is the imposter syndrome? Everybody here familiar with imposter syndrome, right? Or at least I'm not saying you have it. I'm just saying you're familiar with it. However, I'd say like 98% of researchers that I have, interacted with have some degree of imposter syndrome. They're incredibly smart. They're incredibly accomplished, possibly. And they still there's still possibly a little piece in there. And I blame this on graduate school. There's still a little piece in there that's like, oh man, maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe, right? The other 1% are people who are humble and they know they're good. And then the other 1% are just like jerks who are good. And they let you know they're good all the time. And they think, honestly, like, what doesn't stink, right? But be proud and confident because it shows through in the writing. And then you're telling a story. It may not seem like you're telling a story, but you are telling a story. And one of the reasons you're telling a story is stories are engaging, right? Stories are engaging. If you think about any of the fiction that you may read, hopefully you read at least some fiction, right? Think about the books you like, the novellas you like, the short stories you like that have stuck with you. They usually immediately engage you, right? Now, there's obviously some difference between writing fiction and writing a proposal. Like a mystery novel, fiction, the payoff is at the end, right? There's lots of, build up, build up, build up, build up. We don't want to write proposals like mystery novels, okay? You're probably, how many of you are aware of it's now old detective show called Columbo? All right, some. All right. Long and short of it, most stuff you watch on TV, detective shows, you find out what happens and who done it, who's done it at the end, right? For the most part. Columbo was different. Columbo, they showed you who did the murder and what the murderer used right up front. And you would think, oh, that's no fun. But then, okay, the detective Columbo would go through and work it out. Okay. In essence, they would tell you, here's the big important thing up front, right? And here's why it's important. And then you would have someone go behind that and do what? Provide a supporting argument to then to then show how they reached that conclusion. You want to do the same thing. Okay, right? You want to do the same thing. You want to do the same thing, right? Because you're the hero of this story. Think back to being able to give the funder or potential funder what they want, right? Now, I saw, it was shared with me some of the things that people who are, what people are in general are interested in and learning, not necessarily from today, but overall, right? You filled out some kind of a questionnaire. Funders do have aims, goals, right? Sometimes they're put out in explicit funding opportunity announcements, right? Or notice of funding opportunities. They're all called different things, right? But they basically come down to, we're interested in this, this, and this. We want people to be able to provide us this, this, and this, right? Sometimes a funder will be very explicit about what they want. Sometimes a funder will say, here's a general program. We're interested in this general area, in many different things in this general area. And you know what? If you've got something that you think we can use, send it along. Whether it's a specific call for proposals or a response to, let's say, a program, right, where there's a number of opportunities and you initiate the proposal, right? Meaning you come to them and say, you say you have this problem? Guess what? I'm the person to help you with that problem. Whether it's investigator initiated, meaning you look at it and you go to them, or they put out a call, basically, hey, researchers, come help us. You're the hero. And that's how you have to think, right? It goes back to the confidence thing. It goes back to you knowing what you're doing. So, and we can go all through this, right? Because I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'll have you look at it for a second, right? And I do this, this is very intentional because these are basically the main questions you have to answer. You'll notice that there's nothing of like scientific detail in here, right? Because that's not what I deal with. When I review a proposal, I can follow along, right? The science stuff. And that's the key. If you're writing it in such a way that I can follow it, I may not necessarily understand the nitty gritty, but if I can follow it as, take my word for it, an educated, right, layperson, then that's good. Then that means if I can follow, if you will, the points, I can follow the trail that you're creating. If I can do that, then you are doing the same thing for the reader/reviewer, okay? Which is good. If you're looking at this list and you've never written a proposal before, right? Show of hands. Again, you're not on camera. How many of you have never written a proposal for funding before? Okay. All right. You don't count. Oh, all right. You count. All right. You count. I shouldn't say that because like they may not let me have any of the cookies in the back. But people like, there were cookies in the back. I'm surprised there wasn't like a mad rush towards the back. All right. Many of you have, okay? So some of these things you may be like, yeah, Jim, I know this, no duh. But for those of you who haven't, you may look at this list and go, oh man, that's a lot of stuff. It is a lot of stuff. But you know what? You're in control. And I'm breaking it down for you in a sense, because sometimes if you've never written a proposal before and somebody's telling you you got to write a proposal, you may not know where to begin, right? I'll give guidelines, right? Like I said, I don't offer magic bullets. Nobody has a magic bullet for this stuff, folks, right? But I'll offer you options. I'll offer you an approach, okay? So we look at these, keep these in mind, and then I'll ask you a question at the end about these same things. Basically, for people who A, haven't written a proposal before, and then maybe B, if you have written a proposal before and you may not feel confident in answering certain of these questions in the past based upon your proposal writing, it'll also apply to you as well. Thank you. All right. See this? Again, these are lots of things you need to think about when writing a proposal. What's in the, I guess that's violet? I don't know, right? And I did it. I created the highlight. What's in the violet are things that I help people with, right? Developing a concept paper based on agency priorities and review criteria. Oh, okay, that's good to know. The peerer, you sir, because I'll make the font bigger next time. Yeah. Well, I also think that like sometimes it looks better on my screen than it does projected, but I will do that. Thank you. Thanks for not throwing a tomato.
Sure. Will these slides be available afterward?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I will not worry about kind of.
No. Oh my gosh. Right? No. The slide, you'll get the slides. Don't worry about trying to, read it right now or take notes. Take notes, but you don't have to copy the slides, right? But if you can't read it, right? Or if it's hard to read, what do you need to do to start off? Read the solicitation. Or if there is no solicitation, read the program or agency's, right, interests, goals, those kind of things. You guys, I assume, have some kind of a grant specialist, right? You alert your grant specialist immediately, telling them, I'm interested in writing a proposal. They'll love you for it, right? And since they'll love you for it, they'll probably be more inclined to help you out when you're doing the budget because you're coming to them early. Right? Check out sponsor program for priorities, funding, history, strategic matches, and so on. Identify and contact collaborators if necessary, including external evaluators, i.e. peers to read your proposal, right? People you trust. Work with collaborators on roles within the project, things that I don't do, but I know about, right? Develop a concept paper, all right? Communicate with the program officer regarding the concept paper. Again, some of these things will be a little bit different now than they were in the before times.
Jim, do you want to just type a concept paper?
Oh yeah, sure. See, that's the thing too. Like throw something at me if you're like, I don't know what that is, right? Soft objects. All right. Concept paper, sometimes called a one-pager, sometimes called a white paper. It's basically you developing a very tight project summary of your project, right? It's one page, and yeah, you got to cover everything, but, and I can help out with these things, it is an overview that says, here's the problem, here's how I'm going to approach it, okay? And then usually something about the nitty-gritty of the scientific methodology or approach or that kind of stuff. If it's a response to a call, meaning they've already given you the problem, you'll need to spend less time on telling them what the problem is, right? It's just like anything else. If they say, we have a problem, what can you do? Well, they know the problem. However, if you're initiating the proposal, right, they have general areas of interest, but you're looking at a specific problem within their general area of interest. You have to make the argument. You have to tell them, you have this area of interest, here's a problem in that area. So you'll have to spend a little more time, if you will, explaining, setting up the problem. Sometimes, okay, agencies will call for something called a pre-proposal. A pre-proposal is usually like anywhere from a 3 to 5 page document. It's like a one pager or concept paper or project summary, kind of like on steroids. And they usually use that as a gatekeeping device, meaning you send in the pre-proposal and they'll see if you've got something they're interested in, and then they'll give you a go ahead to write a full proposal. That's usually how they work. Sometimes pre-proposals will be said to be not be required, but suggested. If there's one thing that I can tell you right now, whenever you see suggested but not required, it's required, right? It's required, right? So the only time you will never want to not send in a pre-proposal if they mention pre-proposal is if they don't say anything about it being suggested or required, right? Because sometimes an agency will request pre-proposals just to gauge interest, how many people are interested in submitting to this. And quite honestly, if they're not requiring it, or if it's not the soft requirement, meaning suggestion, it would be a good exercise for you to do, but you don't need to send it in, right? But that's what a concept paper is. Everybody kind of, sort of. All right. Identify colleagues, editors to review drafts, right? That goes up to the external evaluators. Draft and abstract, right? Agency priorities and review criteria, right? Abstract can be a project summary, right? Depending on, and I know there may be like a limited number of funders, right? That you're obviously all thinking about as a group based upon your expertise. But just so you know, funders will call things by different names, but they're essentially the same things, right? So for example, National Institutes of Health, they call their one pager that's required a specific aims page, okay? The National Science Foundation, which you're probably familiar with, they call their one pager a project summary. They're both structured in different ways. They address different things, obviously, but are they kind of like the abstract? Yeah. But then you get specific things like, here's an abstract. An abstract is 30 lines of text, right? Or, the project narrative is, 3 sentences, right? That usually wind up being half a page because everybody writes a run-on sentence to get as much in. Don't get hung up on the terminology per se. They'll explain it to you, but keep in mind that you're going to want to have a short, concise, paragraph length explanation of your project. Then you'll talk and draft a narrative or description. This is sometimes called the research strategy, right? It's gonna differ depending on agency. It's the main body of your proposal, right? It's where you're laying everything out. And then you've got to do all the rest of that stuff. And it's best that you set up a timetable to do all of these things much sooner rather than later, right? Different people have different attitudes regarding doing, timetables and Gantt charts and stuff, all that kind of thing. You don't want to wait for the last minute to write proposals because it shows. It really does show. And I still work with investigators who send me things like 2 weeks before the submission date. And you may be thinking, 2 weeks, that's great, right? It's not so hot for me because if there's big problems, it's less time to correct them. Plus, think back to, you're in control of this. Yes, you've got lives, dealing with lots of other things, but don't make life hell for yourself, right? And trying to write a proposal in like 3 weeks, sometimes you can't help it, right? Whether it's because an agency says, hey, we've put this call out today. We need a proposal in 3 weeks. Then you're like, right? Thanks for nothing. But sometimes life happens, right? But if you have the ability to not do a crunch time proposal writing, do it, right? Yeah, thank you. Okay, haha, funny. Lots of people see reviewers, review panels. You're too good. Review panels as like, oh my gosh, they're all evil, right? And they don't know necessarily what they're doing. Some people, not all people, right? Reviewers are there, or at least they used to be there, for one very good reason: to serve the scientific and scholarly goals of the agency and or program, right? They are entrusted with making sure the best stuff gets through. Do they make mistakes? Yes. Do they sometimes read your proposal and go, you didn't say anything about X? And you go back to your proposal, and not only have you said X, you have it like in red and you have flashing neon signs towards it. Yes. They make you laughing because you're like, yeah, I know that happens. They make mistakes, right? And yes, sometimes there are petty reviewers, right? No doubt. But again, what do you control? What you write. Okay? Sometimes, depending on the agency, you may have an idea of who may be reviewing your proposal. Like the NIH has lists of people who are like, so it's these people sit on this review board, these people sit on this review board, right? But you still never know who's going to review the proposal, right? You don't know which 3 out of the 25 listed, for example, are going to do it, are going to review it, right? That's why I think unless you have some really great inside information, which is probably gotten not gotten sketchily, right? You never know who's going to review your proposal, right? You never know. I'm talking about federal agencies, right? Not foundations or anything like that. But usually at foundations, you don't really know either. So you control what you write. You don't control the mindset of the reviewer. But we do know things about the mindset of the reviewer, right? Who is your audience, right? The number of reviewers, you never know, right? Like I work a lot with NIH. It's usually you get 3 people to read your proposal, right? Then those 3 people, they rate it, they talk, and then they decide if it goes to a larger committee to review, right? It's important for you to know how proposals are reviewed to the agency that you're applying to, right? And there are lots of agencies, right? Some have greater leeway than others, okay? So keep that in mind. Like, for example, Department of Defense, or at least how it used to be. I worked for 3 years as an assistant to the Director of Federal Relations at the University of Tennessee. He came straight from the Pentagon. So it wasn't like we were doing a lot of USDA work, right? DoD program managers have a lot of leeway in deciding who gets funded, who doesn't. Way more than NSF, way more than NIH, right? So it's important to know those cultures, right? But what are they? They are human. Haha, no, seriously, they are. They are human. They're reading multiple proposals in consideration for funding in a limited time frame. Many, and this is key, this is where you distinguish yourself from others and differentiate yourself. Many of the proposals they are reading are not well written. They're hard to follow. They're not logically structured. They are not structured in a way that makes it easy to quickly scan and get the idea, right, of the project. They most certainly do not have your training or background, right? You can maybe safely say one person knows specifically about what you're tackling, right? It's usually, if we're talking about 3, right? One person knows the problem, knows essentially your aisle, right, in the stadium of research in which you sit, if you understand that kind of dopey, right? At best, carefully reviewed, right, by 1, maybe 2 experts. You have to also count on that it'll be read perhaps superficially, perhaps not, by non-expert panel members, right? You must rationally persuade both types. And this is sometimes difficult, all right? Because you're needing to write something that is geared towards what? The scientific expert, somebody who really is like your peer, right? And then someone who is not a slouch, but they're not necessarily as familiar, right, with your area or that problem. But they haven't reached that review panel by a draw of lots, right? They're there for a reason. What this means is you have to speak to both the expert, the person who's most likely going to know exactly what you're addressing, and then the person who will still have needed to be explained, right? The example I like to give, no example always like lasts under the scrutiny of the light of day, but I work with biochemists, chemists, and biochemists and mechanical engineers, right? They're like almost the same, right? So there are biochemists I work with, essentially a fusion of biochemistry and engineering, and then chemists. Okay, chemists will understand the chemistry stuff for the most part, right? They may not understand the biochemical stuff. Maybe. There's a good chance they may not really understand just the fusion of the biochemistry and the engineering, right? So if you're talking to a chemist about how you're going to do something, and you are in, chemical and biological engineering, and you're creating nanobots as a better drug delivery system to get through mucus in the lung, you may have to do what? A little more background explaining for the chemist, right? They'll understand certain things, certain concepts, but certain other concepts may be unfamiliar to people who aren't in your field. So you will need to kind of tread lightly on when you use technical terms, right? You have to sometimes show, obviously, that you know what you're talking about to the expert. They would look askance at you if you didn't use technical terms at certain times, certain places. But you also have to be aware of a non-expert and them being unfamiliar with technical terms. All right? It's something you'll learn over time and something an editor helps with. Because obviously, if I'm looking at the term and I go, I'm not so sure how this lines up, right, with what you say next, it could be a question of, Jim, don't worry, you're just not familiar with the term. Everybody in my field knows this. Even a person not on my field wouldn't know it, right? And so on. But that's where having another set of eyes helps, okay? They're not going to be familiar with your work, most likely. They may not be interested in your research area or may not see it as valuable. And ultimately, they're responsible to the agency who will award the funding. They've got somebody to answer to, right? So the reader or reviewer is somebody who may not be incredibly focused on the proposal because they're humans too, right? And they're reading a lot of them. And they're usually reading a lot of them in a short amount of time, short-ish, right? It depends. Sometimes they're not given a lot of lead time to review proposals. So you need to stand out. The way you stand out is by writing well. And I'm going to offer a specific approach to writing, okay? And I will read this, particularly since most likely you can't read it, right? Communication. You are communicating. This isn't science communication. You're writing to a lay audience, but you're communicating to experts or expert adjacent, right, individuals. Communicating, proper structuring, and meeting reader expectations. And from this point on, I'm going to use reader and reviewer, right, as interchangeable, right? Most of my approach and most of everybody's approach who does what I do is coming from this guy, George Gopin and Judith Swan, right? He says the substance of science comprises more than the discovery and recording of data. It extends crucially to include the act of interpretation. In any recording or articulation, no matter how haphazard or confused, each word resides in one or more distinct structural locations. The resulting structure, even more than the meanings of individual words, but they count the meanings, significantly influences the reader during the act of interpretation, understanding what they're saying. The question then becomes whether the structure created by the writer, intentionally or not, helps or hinders the reader in the process of interpreting scientific writing. Honestly, any writing, however, Gopin's talking specifically about scientific writing. Your concern is going to be about creating structures to meet reader expectations so that they're able to easily follow along. You are giving them essentially a set of directions, right? You want to give them as complete and clear a set of directions as possible, right? You are the one responsible for creating the structure and meeting their expectations. Okay? Again, you're in control of this. Okay, I will read this because you can't read it. Reader expectations, and this is key. This is the beginning part where you go, okay, here's how I have to sort of, maybe if you want to accept it or not, this here is how I'm going to shape my writing, okay? And you may or may not have ever been introduced to this before. What are your reader expectations? Structure created by your writing, right, must meet expectations generated by their role as readers and reviewers. Poorly structured proposals frustrate reader expectations, resulting in misunderstanding and lack of interest. And here's the cool thing about this, is that you have read a lot, okay? And you have experienced, while you're reading, when something doesn't make sense. Some people call this, I think it's called mental whiplash. When you read something, like you'll get through a paragraph and go, huh? Right? The whiplash part, huh? What? You want to avoid giving people mental whiplash. Everyone's probably experienced mental whiplash at one point or another, right? Creating the structure and meeting expectation means you have to know how people read. And since we're all in the West and we've been taught to read a certain way, and most science is written in English and so on, or at least in our country if you want funding, right? We know that information is interpreted more easily and more uniformly if it is placed where readers expect to find it. Again, structure. It all comes down to the sentence as the basic building block of creating your story. Because readers expect the subject to appear first and the object to appear at the end. It really is as simple as that. If you make sure your writing does that at every step of the way, you are well on your way to writing something that's very clear and easy to follow. Readers naturally emphasize the material that arrives at the end of a sentence. Don't worry about the lesson 5. Okay, there's not going to be 5 lessons today. It's for something else. You're like, God, we don't have that much time. I'll have to bring them like pillows to nap. And you can go ahead. Next. I'll again read this. What we have so far is what? A sentence as the basic story structure. It has an opening, there's a challenge or an action, and then there's a resolution. Sentences are structured object at the beginning. Not subject at the beginning, object at the end. And the object at the end is usually presenting new information. We also take, as readers, says Gopin, mental breaths. And you have experienced this, you probably don't know what to call it. We tend to take something like a mental breath as we begin to read each new sentence. thereby summoning the tension with which we pay attention to the unfolding of the syntax. Highfalutin words for by which we understand it and then try to move on to the next sentence, all right? As we recognize that the sentence is drawing towards its conclusion, we begin to exhale that mental breath. The exhalation produces a sense of emphasis. Moreover, we delight, well, your mileage may vary, we delight in being rewarded at the end of it labor with something that makes the ongoing effort worthwhile, beginning with the exciting material and ending with a lack of luster often leaves us disappointed and destroys our sense of momentum. We do not start with the strawberry shortcake and work our way up to the broccoli. Haha. In other words, it's constant movement and momentum, okay, as the sentences connect, as one sentence follows from another. You need to keep images like links in a chain in your head here, right? One also very key part here, do not exhaust your reader's mental breath with unclear or overly long sentences. Overly long is like when you're getting 40 words or more, it's overly long. Think about it. And I'm not necessarily talking about run-on sentences. When you're reading, it's like you're holding your breath in a little bit. This is what he's saying. It's a mental activity of you doing what? Trying to understand, right? It's like trying to swim a lap in a pool when you're underwater, okay? I don't know how many people swim, but, right? You know the lengths of the pool, right? You have a good idea of how long you can hold your breath. That's what you're doing when you're writing. You're giving that reader an idea of the expectation is what? No longer than this. You're giving them something satisfying at the end, new information that then does what? Sets up the next sentence. Now, think back to when you've read things that seemingly go on and introduce multiple concepts in one sentence. Not a good thing usually. You are trying to juggle all these things at once, right? In order to try to reach the end. Now imagine, go back to the pool analogy. You're swimming your lap and you notice that the length of the pool just keeps getting longer and longer and longer, all right? It's going to frustrate you, number one. And number two, you're going to run out of breath. So much of this for gauging your proposal to how people read, it's a mental psychological game, right? We read certain ways. We read from right to left. We expect something at the end to set up the next sentence and connect it, right?
So I'm gonna pause you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, sorry.
So I'm just gonna grab this. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna have to have a part one and part two because Jim's gotten through about half of his slides.
I did suggest a part one and part two.
I know, it's a good idea. So, and I do have to say, as far as I'm concerned, I was a reviewer last year and this content is really good. As a reviewer, I was super frustrated by all the things he said. So I think this is really great content. I want to separate a little bit that Jim came here to talk to us mostly about writing. I know there's a lot of questions about funding and fund solicitations and different types, and we have more sessions. So today, in terms of the questions, we have about 10 minutes to ask questions of Jim. I think we're going to focus mostly on proposal writing. So I already had one that I wanted to pass to you, which is that you alluded to how things might be changing moving forward. So what in particular would you say is changing moving forward in terms of proposal writing? I mean, you're obviously guessing, but what would you guess is shifting?
Okay. First, I just want to say you'll still get the full slides.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can essentially
Yes.
read ahead if I am invited back, right? All right, what's changing? Well, I'll be honest, okay? We don't know what's changing. We can kind of game things out. Worst case scenario is there will be essentially political apparatchiks in charge of deciding what gets funded and what doesn't get funded. Worst case scenario. And I think we could probably all understand that that's not good for science, right? Good science doesn't get done when it's purely driven by political ends. You can look at your history, right? Look at the mass exodus of scientists out of Nazi Germany. All right. Worst case scenario. Best case scenario, things go almost like they went before, only there's a hell of a lot more red tape and scrutiny, right? How do you handle it? That's an individual decision on your part, right? And this is why one reason why I'm not necessarily on Rio's like Christmas card list right now. You'll have to decide what's more important, right? Science or something else, right? Truth or something else, scientific truth or something else, scientific method or something else. Because it is that stark, right? I'm not saying across the board, it may be impossible to do good science. I think a lot's going to depend on the agency, right? You know, there are certain people, right? Like my office among them, who are seemingly right now going, okay, you know, we'll just increase DoD funding. It's not that easy. It's not like you could say it and it happens. But one would think, depending on atmospheres and so on, that DoD funding might be okay. But now DoD has the 15% indirect cost rate, right? So you need to be, I'm not going to give you platitudes like you need to be nimble, right? Or you need to expand your portfolio. You'll just need to decide what means the most for you, right? I have worked here for 5 years. I know the importance of NOAA. I know the importance of series, right? I know that the work you do and will do and the research you are doing and will do is vital. It's important. And it's interconnected to so many other things, right? So, I mean, not the best answer.
Well, I want to add 2 more questions.
Yeah.
One would be, do you think AI is going to be used in a different way? And the second one would be, have you seen another time where certain phrases have been become hot topics that then you have to, find new language for?
Yes, I can answer both of those. Now, keep in mind, I'm giving these answers not as somebody who like totally has their finger on the pulse of what's going to happen, right? I've been doing this for 15 years, right? So like I have experience at least with like 3 administrations, right? And I've read, right? You should read. So AI, all right. Do we have a whole nother like hour to talk about AI? Because how AI might influence things in terms of writing proposals, don't use it. Okay. In addition to like my ethical qualms and concerns about AI, right? It's in general just a really supercharged like text amalgamator. Okay. It doesn't do anything new. It doesn't do anything unique. And even if you create something, have it, let's say, I don't know, like tighten it up. I'm telling you, you're cheating yourself. You are not developing the skill that way. Number one, the skill of writing. And number two, I don't see a system touted as being cost effective and saving you time when you have to go back and check to see if what it's written is actually true. And it hasn't escaped that yet, right? Now, how AI might be used nefariously, right? To review things, all right? I think we were already encountering that, all right? I think we're already encountering that. But in terms of proposal writing, stay away from it. You're not going to develop your skills. I mean, I hate to say this, but I am this old. it really does come down to when I was a kid and we're doing math, and I'm so old that like pocket calculators were still kind of new, all right? And you wanted to bring your pocket calculator into class. And the teacher said, no, if you rely on the calculator, you're not going to fully develop your skills to do math. And as a kid, I was like, screw you, right? But you know what? And I see this with my little nephews. Relying on that crutch does affect your ability. It does affect your ability and your skill development, right? And, not for nothing, I'm also kind of take the tack that let's see who's developing and using AI and what are they using it for? And is it a tool based upon how it's currently being used? Is it a tool I really want to put my 100% behind? What was the second question? Because I completely forgot.
I think right now there's certain keywords that
Okay.
people might search, use AI to reject proposal.
Right. Okay. Yes. Right. If they're not just using a control F to find, right? They're using the more expensive, energy consuming, environmentally destructive version of control F, which is AI, right? Yes, it's being done. It was done with NSF, right? Ted Cruz put out the report way before Trump got elected about, it was like 220 something. It was ridiculous, right? And all they did was go through with AI and find words, such that I have researchers who are concerned just simply about using the word diversity, okay? When they're talking about the diversity of cells, right? What can I tell you to do? There are people who have said, well, just change the words around, right? We know what they're looking for, just change the words around. Okay, yes, and you know what? That's usually said by people, I'll be honest, who've probably never done serious research in their life. Not that I've done serious research, but I know from reading lots of proposals, sometimes there are words you just have to use, particularly when you are, at least now, still sending it off to an expert in your field or expert adjacent, right? You cannot necessarily game or adjust for the complete stupidity of people who are going to throw something out just because they take a word out of context. You're welcome, man. So, do you have to be careful? Depends on how you want to roll, right? If you want to get funding no matter what, play their game. That's what it comes down to, right? Will playing their game possibly affect the rigor of your science? Maybe. You've got to decide, right? You've got to decide. But it's obviously ludicrous when AI or Control F or a 20-year-old who's reading something and has no idea what they're reading, right, goes through and singles out a word or two taken completely out of context, right, and says your proposal isn't fundable. Because that's what it comes down to, right? So, that's the choice, right? The choice is you try to play their game. Keep in mind, however, that they will change the rules on you whenever they can, right? When you get to the point where certain words in this context begin to become verboten, then what's the next word to become verboten in the sense of you trying to do science? And it makes sense. Because honestly, too, you also have to do what? You have to also have to write articles and so on that what? Speak intelligently to your peers, right? Usually what's looked at is one, side of, if you will, your profession, right? And your career, right? And that's funding, right? Potentially funding. You want funding, but you also don't want to necessarily be seen as somebody who isn't making sense to the rest of your peers. And that usually is never talked about. I'll take any other questions you got.
Yeah, I think we're at 10:30, so this is what we're going to do right now. There are a couple of other questions in the chat, so I want to make sure everybody in the room saw them about resources. So Jim has highlighted some of the resources you can reach out to him and do you want to just summarize those really quickly, Jim, in
Yes,
terms of how they can contact you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. First, at the end of the slides, there are some resources. They're not hot linked or anything, but the titles are there, right? The names of the articles and so on are there. How you can contact me, right? Well, you'll send out my email, right? But it's James dot, what's my last name? No, Mazzuccolo, Mazzouccolo at colorado.edu, right? If you're a research, this is where it gets kind of crazy. If you're a research associate on up for the University of Colorado Boulder, I can review proposals. I can review one-pagers. All right. If you are not necessarily working for CU Boulder, email me and we can talk. Right? Because we can talk. Right? And that's how you would contact me.
And do you share examples of successful proposals or anything that would be helpful?
Okay. Examples of successful proposals are, number one, this university does not have, if you will, a library of successful proposals. Some universities do. It's usually behind, like, not a paywall, but a security wall, right? That kind of stuff. I don't have them. You can always ask someone who has successful funding at a certain agency or particularly a program, right? If they will share their proposal with you, number one. Number two, if you're working with me and I know someone who has been funded by that agency, I'm happy to make the connection, right? And I'd say 9 times out of 10, they like me. So if you drop my name, they may be like, oh yeah, sure, Jim. Okay, no problem, right? But it's the 10th out of 10th that then you may be out of luck. But also keep in mind, and since this comes up a lot, successful proposals are also not a blueprint for your successful proposal. And I say that because I think sometimes people think, well, this one got funded. If I write it like this, it'll get funded. If it's very clearly written and you follow the generalities of how well it reads and so on, yeah, you can learn a lot. No doubt you can learn a lot, right? But you're also writing specifically to your own story, right? You've got to write your own story. And some agencies, they do have examples of successful proposals up on their websites. Yeah, like NIH does, right? And so on.
Yeah.
So, check for that as well. But go to peers who've been funded. That's the best, because everybody's also a little like leery about lending out proposals, right? Because they think everything's going to get stolen. I don't blame them, but right, that's what I would suggest.
I would agree. Having people read it and give you feedback is actually very, very helpful. So we're going to take just a short break in case you want to go back and there are cookies. They're homemade. I'm going to be offended if nobody has a cookie. So at least one person has to have a cookie.
Nope.
Sorry to those online. We also have coffee in the back. We're going to take a short break and then sit down next to somebody else. We're going to have a short activity to talk with each other. The goal of the rest of the time until 11 is to really think about what resources do you all need. We want to make sure that both the sessions that we're going to keep offering and that the proposal mentoring program serves the need that's out there, as opposed to creating something that wouldn't serve the need, right? So we need to hear from you. Jim is going to stay so we can still ask him questions. So let's just take a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 10:40.